Hello, everybody. This is Margaret Kimberley. Thank you for joining me to discuss my book, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. I had a introductory video, and I talked a little about George Washington, the first president. And in particular, I discussed the fact that he was a slaveholder. He and his wife, Martha, owned more than 200 people. Excuse me. And among other things, and this is the kind of thing that is not taught but should be, we know that he literally took teeth out of the mouths of the enslaved people he held to put them into his dentures. Now, we were taught when I was a kid, Washington had false teeth and they were made of wood. They were not made of wood. They were made of ivory and metal, and some of them contained actual teeth that were taken from enslaved people. And it's important to point that out, but that's not the sum total of the understanding we should have about George Washington. The first capital of the United States was New York City, and Washington was sworn into office there in 1789. The Residence Act, passed in 1790, mandated that the capital be temporarily moved to Philadelphia, a little further south, for a period of 10 years before being permanently established along the Potomac River by 1800, even further south. Now, why would you need to build a new city when you already had cities? Well, the answer is very simple. The idea was to protect slavery and to make sure it was in those states that depended most upon the slave system. And I say depended most because slavery existed in northern states too at that time. But they wanted to make sure it was protected, physically protected, and they built a new city that was squeezed between Maryland and Virginia. But while Washington was in Philadelphia, there was a problem. A 1780 Pennsylvania law guaranteed enslaved people the right to seek their freedom if they remained in the state for more than 6 months. Now, this was a problem for Washington, but he had a solution. He rotated his human property for 6-month intervals between Pennsylvania and Virginia. And he did that in clear violation of a 1788 amendment to the law, which prohibited doing just that. And so in 1791, he started by rotating 9 people, including a dower slave, that is to say, dower enslaved person, that is to say, she was held by the estate of Martha Washington's first husband. And this young woman, Ona Maria Judge, managed to escape from the Washingtons. And but he rotated Miss Judge and others, and he said in a letter, if they conceived they had a right to it, it would make them insolent in a state of slavery. As all except Hercules and Paris are dour Negroes, it behooves me to prevent the emancipation of them. Otherwise, I shall not only lose the use of them, but may have them to pay for. If upon taking good advice it is found expedient to send them back to Virginia, I wish to have it accomplished under pretext that may deceive both them and the public. And he was quite serious. Miss Judge, Oni Judge, managed to escape from the Washingtons. I was packing to go. And this is what she said in an interview many years later in 1845. I was packing to go. I didn't know where. I had friends among the colored people of Philadelphia, had my things carried there beforehand, and left the Washingtons' house while they were eating dinner. She managed to get to New Hampshire, but she still was not safe. There was a fugitive slave clause in the Constitution, and she could legally have been returned to slavery. And a friend of the Washingtons saw her in New Hampshire and told them that they had seen her. So he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury demanding his assistance in getting her back. And he said, "I'm sorry to give you or anyone else trouble on such a trifling occasion, but the ingratitude of the girl, who was brought up and treated more like a child than a servant, ought not to escape with impunity if it can be avoided." So he sent people to try to trick her to come back as a dour enslaved person. He did not have the right to free her, so he was lying. But she managed to thwart all these attempts to get her back and remained free the rest of her life. And it's something very funny, that is to say, ironic. The name Washington is the blackest name, blackest in quotes, surname in the United States. That is to say, some 90% of people with the last name Washington are black. It's not clear how many of them may be enslaved from him, or from the enslaved people may be descended from him, or the enslaved people on his estate. Booker T. Washington, for example, claimed to have chosen the name randomly when he was a child. So it's an interesting irony of history that black people would choose to identify themselves with the first of 12 slaveholding presidents. Washington, like others, would claim to express reservations about slavery. And at one point he said, "I want to be quit of Negroes," but he never freed any in his lifetime. As I said, did not have the right to free the dower slaves or who belonged to her first husband's estate. But in his will, he did agree to free those who he owned after Martha's death. And this left his widow, Martha, afraid that she would be killed by people who would gain their freedom if she died. I think that's very funny. Abigail Adams visited her in 1800 and said, in the state in which they were left by the general to be free at her death, she did not feel as though her life was safe in their hands, many of whom would be told that it was in their interest to get rid of her. She therefore was advised to set them all free at the close of the year. And she did free those people who had belonged to George Washington. But the dower enslaved people, those from the first husband's estate, never gained their freedom. Upon her death, they were dispersed among her grandchildren, splitting up numerous families in the process. And the slaveholding of those early presidents, 4 of the first 5 presidents were slaveholding Virginians. And it's not incidental, but it's linked to the fact that they held that the people who held the highest office in the land were wealthy and powerful, and they became that way because they were slaveholding. And the country was committed to maintaining this institution, and whether from the North or the South, no president considered ending the practice until Abraham Lincoln was forced to confront the matter in 1861. And yes, he was forced to confront the matter. I'm skipping way ahead, as this is just the first of 45 chapters. So I hope that you will, of course, I want you to buy the book, Prejudential. And if you look below the video, you will see a link. You can buy the book directly from the publisher, Steerforth Press, from Barnes & Noble, from Amazon. It's on Audible, audiobook narrated by me. You can order it from your independent bookstore. And I hope that you do so and get the full impact of the story of Black people and the presidents of the United States. So that's Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. I'll be back in a week or so with the next chapter, maybe sooner if we're all lucky. Thank you so much for joining me.